Hello again. I'm Karen Provenza from the Napa Bookmine, here with Napa author and teacher Henry Michalski, who's been captivating students and many others with his story of how his parents triumphed over the atrocities of World War II. His book, Torn Lilacs, A True Story of Love, Defiance, and Hope, tells the riveting and very personal story of how his parents survived the unimaginable. Their will to survive, to find one another again, is harrowing and inspiring and reads just like a Hollywood movie, which I hope it becomes one day soon. Henry Michalski was born in Kazakhstan and arrived in the United States with his family as a 4-year-old on August 29th, 1949. The following year, the family settled in San Francisco, and he had a long, successful career at Napa High teaching history. And he's most proud of his 2 children and 3 grandchildren who are lucky to have this story for them to access later in life. And Henry, I am unmuting you so that you can begin. Actually, I think you have to unmute yourself. Yes, you do. Say hello and let's make sure we can hear you.
Okay, there.
There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. And I'm going to admit a couple more people and ask you first to just tell us a little bit about how your story is so different than the one we're so familiar with. You know, when we hear about World War II and the Holocaust, we think automatically of concentration camps. Correct. And your story is vastly different and an important one to share, because it may certainly be something that we all share.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Karen, for hosting this. And I want to thank Napa Bookmine for hosting this. And it's so wonderful to see all my friends here. I see Leo from high school, Howard is here, Joel Bellway from junior high, Rabbi Kopstein. Where are you, Rabbi? I think Hawaii or Hong Kong. Jay is here. Let's see, and Jan is here all the way from Michigan. Edward is here. Kenny Lloyd is here. Hi, Ken. And the McDonald's are here. Myrna and Jim. Hal Ottaway from Iowa. This is really wonderful. It feels like a reunion. This is Shane, who I've been corresponding with, and I've never met you. Hello, Shane. To answer your question, I'll say that, yes, with all due respect to the survivors of Auschwitz and the concentration camps, unlike 90% of the books on the Holocaust and people that survived it, my book is very different. I should say my parents' book. This is Torn Lilacs. This is the book I'm very proud of, designed by my friend Bob Zingmark. Did a beautiful job. These are my parents. And in between, you see she's holding some torn lilacs, the only thing that's colorized. And as the subtitle says, it's a true World War II story of love, defiance, and hope. Probably it should have been called A Book of Miracles, because it primarily, like I said, unlike the other stories that took place in Auschwitz, somewhere in Europe, this story starts in Poland. They go to Ukraine to be with my father. Eventually, my mother is sent to Siberia, where she experiences unspeakable horrors. Just amazing things go on. And then for me, one of the most riveting things, you can imagine, for 2 weeks, they're on a raft, leaving their Siberian prison camp, because they've been let free, and they end up in Kazakhstan. They went south, 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 where it's warm, and they ended up in Kazakhstan. And then my father comes back into the picture. It's an amazing story. It's a true love story. It takes place in a region of the world that we really don't know that much about. So I'm very proud of how the book has been received so far. One question that's always asked is, Henry, is this true? Everybody asks me, they say, did you make up these stories? And the common answer I say is, I'm not clever enough to make up this stuff. You have to have the mind of a criminal or something. I couldn't make up this in my wildest imaginations. My cousin Reuven is the first person. This is Kuba, my mother's brother, who she ran with. Kuba's son, Reuven, lives in Tel Aviv now. He was the first to read the book months ago, very first. And he calls me from Tel Aviv. It was an hour call. And he says, Henry, my dear cousin, did you make up these stories about my father? Because he was never told these stories. He didn't know. He knew his father had his toes amputated. He knew bits and pieces like I did as a child, but he didn't know the story. When I heard the story as a child, bits and pieces, of course, I heard about amputations and apparitions and this and incredible loss. I was curious and asked questions. Eventually, in 1976, I sat my parents down with a tape recorder and recorded the first interview, where I learned that you don't put them both together on the couch at the same time. They were interrupting and things, but we went back many times. We did taped interviews, video interviews, corroborations. I went to Israel, to the archives in New York, to Yad Vashem, et cetera. Did a lot of research and we pieced together this book, which is accurate. These are stories that my mother and father told me, and they're harrowing stories of survival. The book really should be called a book of miracles. It's also a very important book, I'll say, especially today in these uncertain times. We live in a terrible time right now, where I just saw a poll the other day, 62% of Americans are afraid to express their political feelings, their thoughts about politics. They're afraid. Ken Burns, the legendary filmmaker, recently said, and I'm going to quote him here, he was talking about the three major challenges in America's history: the Civil War, the Great Depression of the 30s, and World War II. And what he says is, as a nation, that times right now are just as bad, maybe worse than during the Civil War. We are at each other's throats, ready for secession, and it bothers me tremendously. I love the country that took in the Michalski family, that I adopted as my home. I love this country. I'll do anything for it. And I see a lot of angst, questions, people very confused and afraid to talk out. So I think the book is really important because it tells what happens when hatred goes unchecked. This could be the pinnacle, the end result, of course, is genocide. So what I'd like to do briefly, because I really appreciate questions and answers most of all, and I'm desperate to hear what you've got to say, but I'd like to read just a couple pages just to give you a flavor of the book, if that's okay. The book actually starts 1939, 38. My father's home on leave from the military. He's recruited. He's in the Polish cavalry. He's home on leave in Gostynin, very small Polish town. He goes to a Zionist nightclub with a friend that night. And on the table, entertaining, singing for everybody, is Fela Kuvent. She's dark, she's got beautiful eyes, she's captivating. He falls instantly, madly in love with her. And he determines at that moment that this woman is going to be his life. She's going to be his better half, and she's going to travel through life with him forever. She, of course, has very different ideas about this. She'd rather be with her lady friend. But he pursues her relentlessly, and one by one, all the other boys fall away, and it's just Yoska and Fela. And before they can really get married, he's desperate to marry her, but she's not sure. The war is going to come. It's imminent. The war starts September 1st, 1939. He's immediately mobilized to the front. And there's a terrible incident where he's actually left for dead. Some shrapnel hits his helmet. He falls, he's dead. People are running in a panic. He's left to die. And word gets back to Gostynin that her betrothed, Yoska, my father, my future father, is dead. They actually sat Shiva for him. And things got worse in Gostynin. The Nazis entered, every day new laws, new prohibitions, new restrictions. You had to wear a yellow star, you couldn't marry, you couldn't sit on a bench, you couldn't have a job. It got so bad that it was determined that first Kuba left with 3 other boys. In the winter, they left. They went towards Russia just to get away from it. It was so bad. A month later, he came back. He said it was just impossible out there The deeply Catholic, superstitious Poles would not even give them a meal or shelter. They were all suspicious and they wouldn't harbor a Jew. Now the story gets interesting. Anyway, page 60 more or less, they decide, what happens is this. My mother has a cousin and she's got a brain tumor, Malka. She's a beautiful young girl, but she lives in another village where there's not a hospital. The father, the farmer, brings the daughter to Gustanin to have her operation and to heal. After she's healed, the father comes back with a horse-drawn wagon full of hay to pick up his daughter and take her home. That night, the Kuven family has a meeting and they say it's time for the children to go. The father is going to go to the camps in a few days. We don't know what's going to happen to the mother and little Mashka, her 13-year-old daughter, or my mother's sister, 13 years old. It was decided that Uncle Meir, when he takes Malka back to their village, would hide Kuba and Fela, the brothers, the siblings, in the wagon, and they would leave like that. Luckily for them, it was a terrible winter stormy day, horizontal winds, and the Nazis didn't have the energy to even stop. Well, they stopped the wagon, they asked questions, but they didn't poke around. Had they done that, Kuba and Fela would have been shot instantly. Uncle Meir and of course his daughter Malka would have been shot as well. That's the risk they took. And that was just the beginning. I'm going to read to you now one section, just a few pages, and bear with me, please, where they've gone through one harrowing experience to another, and now they're with a group of people, and they're being marched towards the forest with shovels, and it's very obvious what's going to happen to this group. Nazis are marching them into the forest, guns and shovels, and the end is near. This is from page 89. They slogged along the icy dirt road, piled high at its sides with snow, and approached the woods. The Germans were negotiating with their dispirited prisoners, promising them freedom in exchange for various items. The young prisoners sensed something sinister. Out of desperation, they offered jewelry, money they had hidden, anything in exchange for their freedom. Lugging their heavy canvas rucksacks, which contained everything they owned, Fela and her brother fell further behind. She noticed a mother with two children shamelessly groveling before the Nazis, offering up her diamond wedding ring, begging and weeping. Fela said to her brother Kuba, you know what? If they come to us, we'll say we have nothing, nothing. Once you start negotiating with them, they'll take everything and they'll shoot you anyway. So we'll say we have nothing. Kuba nodded in agreement. I'm going to skip a little bit here. I shouldn't. Hold on. Kuba nodded in agreement. His leather shoes were soaked from the wet mud. Walking became a chore. As they tramped along the slushy road towards the dense woodland, Fela sensed an opportunity. At the rear of the doomed procession, she whispered to her brother, you know what? They are so busy dealing, they're not even paying attention. Let's make a run. Take my hand. Kuba grimaced at the thought of running in the snow, but he knew that his sister was right. Escaping was their only hope. He took her hand. They slowed their pace even more, lagging further behind, waiting for the perfect moment when suddenly Fela jerked Kuba's hand, causing the two of them to veer off the road and over a snowy embankment. In a flash, they were out of sight. Without hesitation, they slid on their behinds down a steep grade for several meters into a ravine, stopped for a quick breath, and kept plodding on until they were well away from the road. They had managed to elude their captors and certain death. Fela, who knew the guards would discover their absence and come looking for them, encouraged her brother to continue on. They got up and trudged into the dense grove of trees, mostly fir and Polish larch, standing like winter sculptures, heavily laden with snow. With no time to admire nature's beauty, fear and adrenaline pushed them on. But Kuba could hardly keep up. His feet burned with pain and numbness was setting in. It took everything he had not to scream out. Fela grabbed Kuba's pack, took him by the arm and encouraged him to muster all of his strength to keep walking. Please, Kubala, I know it's hard for you, but you got to keep going. A faint sun in the gray, overcast sky was low to the ground, and soon it would be dark. The siblings paused for a moment to catch their breaths. Off in the distance, the faint bark of a dog broke the silence, sending a shiver of fear down their spines. The sound became clearer, causing the runaways to quicken their gait and push further and deeper into the woods. In the darkening forest, the brother and sister, exhausted, tripped and fell, got up and managed a few more steps. They stumbled like drunks in the thick powder, but continued pushing onward. Now they could clearly hear the dog yapping and muted shouts of a man, probably a soldier, echoing in the gloom of the forest. Out of sheer terror, the two struggled to move forward with every ounce of energy remaining in their weary bodies. Kuba winced with every step. Fella fell, snapping a tree branch. She froze, petrified that the dog would hear their sound. The canine was getting closer and its bark became a threatening growl. And this goes on for another page or so. I'm going to stop here. It's so intense now. The dog is within meters. And for some mysterious reason, the dog misses their smell. I can never forget, as a child, my mother told me this story. And she told me this section, which I'm not going to read, I'll just tell you. Kuba and Fella were in a hole under a tree, and they were clutching each other. They were holding onto each other so tight. At one point, Fella said, Kuba, I can feel your heart beating through all these clothes. I can feel your heart. Can you feel mine? And he holds her tight. He says, yeah, Fella, I can hear your heart too. And the dog approaches, and he's now uttering the words of the sacred Shema, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, which a person says before they die, before they go to sleep, and the first thing when they wake up. And this is the end. And of course, it's a book of miracles. The dog loses the scent, they survive. But they're in the snow, they're paralyzed with fear, they're shivering, they're hungry, they're desperate, and they plod on to the next village where yet another horror is waiting for them, one after another. And the whole idea is for them to get to Olesko, a small town in Ukraine where my father was kept as a POW. They wanted to go to him because they got a letter from him. He's alive. He's in a POW camp held by the Russians, and they wanted to go to him. They go there. Eventually, they make it. And then she's taken into Siberia, and the story just goes on. And it truly is an amazing story that must be read. And I'm glad. I'm just going to put this in real quick. This book now is required reading at Sonoma State University in a class on anti-Semitism. And that makes me very proud that my parents' suffering was not for nothing, that their suffering had a purpose. Hopefully you can teach a new generation today where hate can take us if it's unchecked. So hopefully you'll read the book, and we'll get together. I'll gladly sign it, whatever. But I think this is a very important book to be read, and I'm thrilled with the reception. And I thank you so much for listening to what I read, and I'd love to entertain your questions at this point. Anything you have.
So,
Leo. Can we start with Leo Foster?
Sure. So, Henry, why don't I let you call on whomever you choose, and at that point you can unmute yourself and ask your question. If you'd like me to ask it for you, feel free to put it in chat.
Well, Leo had her hand up. I'd like her to ask the question. Would that be okay?
Sure.
Leo Foster, all the way from Michigan.
All the way from Michigan. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I of course knew your parents. I'm just amazed at the descriptions in this book, how the adjectives, the verbs, all the words come together in such a beautiful story. The descriptions are just fantastic. And like you said, it's a book of miracles, and each episode is more exciting than the last one. And I'm just blown away with how beautifully written this book is.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Leo. I appreciate that. Edward. Hi, Edward. You need to unmute yourself. Karen, maybe you should ask the questions or call on people.
Yes, I was so pleased. As I contacted you right away after I saw your book, that I said, wait a minute, that's my parents' stories. I'm so glad that, we must have met somewhere on the train, because I could figure out my parents were telling me the same story, very much the way your parents told you in segments. But every segment basis sounded so familiar. So thank you for writing this book. I really appreciate that.
And thank you for writing to me, Edward. I would like to meet you one day. Thank you very much for saying that.
Neighbors.
I'd like to call on Rabbi David Kopstein. I see you there, Rabbi. How are you?
Hey, Henry. So
Rabbi,
nice.
where are you right now?
We are in, after Hawaii and Hong Kong, where we met you, we're in beautiful downtown Madison, Wisconsin.
Oh, you're in Wisconsin. Okay, good. Good.
What
It's
a
good to see you.
transition. What a transition.
Yeah.
Henry, I tell you, first of all, your voice is so good. I can see you being on radio and talking about your book. If you haven't made any appearances yet, I think you should. I can see you on TV as well, because you're so good looking. And I would also
My
say,
mother.
Henry, I loved your book. I read it. I read Schindler's List, the book, and your book is much, much better written and much more interesting. I think you could do something. I think the first scene of your movie should be all those people floating down on that raft.
Yeah, that
My
raft.
goodness.
Yeah.
How did they ever come up with that, and how did they ever survive that trip?
Right.
Henry, I besides loving the book and loving you, please give my regards to Howard and Kathy Gilbert. I miss them. And Howard Eisenstark, who's here, and I said hi to him already. That's great. I think you have a whole audience at Napa Beth Shalom for your book. But I also want to make 2 comments for the next edition.
Okay.
For the next edition, I think there should be a chronology, just a page or a page and a half of what happened when, because I kind of got lost in some of that. And the other thing would be a map. We don't know most Americans don't know from Eastern Europe and Russia. And the only way we know about Kazakhstan is from Borat,
Right.
the Borat movies.
David,
So,
the next edition will have maps, okay?
all right, it's a
Not the
deal. Maybe,
first person to say that.
okay,
We'll
I'm
get
not the
maps.
first. Okay, good. How about a chronology as well, if you can just follow the years. Anyhow, I love the book. Here it is, ladies and gentlemen. Torn Lilacs by Henry Michalski. Wonderful, great book, and thank you for inviting me to this open-ended thing. So I'm not as far away as Michigan, but I'm pretty far away, but close to you always.
You're also my favorite rabbi. Thank you so much, David Kopstein.
You
Thank you.
said that once, and I appreciate it.
It's
Thank
the
you.
truth.
And
So
you're my favorite.
Shane, go ahead and unmute yourself. Let's see, there we go.
Thank you. Well, David, go Badgers. I love Madison. I went to school there. I'm a UW Badger for sure. So just wanted to say that. Enjoyed hearing you there. My question, Henry, is this story is so well told, and you're immediately just drawn into it from page 1, and you're right there. How did you compile this information? And over how many years, and how were you able to document it and then tell it so well? Obviously, I mean, you're a very creative guy, obviously, but it's just incredible. Blew me away. I'm so riveted by the book. I read it 6 or 8 months ago when I first contacted you, and I still think about it daily. Some of these stories, and I just wanted to hear a little bit about that process, about how you compile this information and how you're able to tell it.
And just to add to that, Henry, is in my Jewish family, no one talked about what happened at all. So I think part of your question is, how did you get the nitty-gritty detail when the culture in general has not shared this story? I was in my 30s before I realized that I had family members that died in the Holocaust. And
thank you for that question, Shane. Thank you. First of all, my father didn't talk about it. He was a workaholic, and he buried himself in work. That was his escape. We didn't know the word PTSD in those days. We would just say, my mother's nervous, she's high strung, she's whatever. She was when she died in 2019 at the age of 99, the doctors told me this woman had severe PTSD. We knew that. And ever since I was a child, she told stories. She wanted those stories to be out there. And as I grew up and took an interest in history, I was a philatelist and this and that. History for me was a natural. I asked a lot of questions, and it didn't take long. She designated me the author of her story. She said, "You're going to write this book. I'm not telling Steven Spielberg the book. He's not going to get rich off of my misery. You're going to write this book." And by 1976, I was convinced that this story had to be told. You're asking, why did it take 45 years? And I'm not going to go into that. I'm not going to go into all 45 years, but things happen. You know, you raise a family, you have an occupation, you write, you get angry at your mother for 6 months, you come back to it, you go on vacation. But all that time, even especially when I was having a good time, this is very Jewish. I'm on the beach having a good time in Hawaii, and in the back of my mind, my mother saying, "Henry, write the book. The world has to know the story." And when she was up in age in her late 90s, I dedicated myself and I said, finally, I've got to put this thing together. My friend Jay Getting in Arizona, I was down there, just happened to be visiting him in Arizona. In Sun City West, we were going to see some Giant games, and we were talking about the story. And I said, and one thing led to another. Jay wrote a book, and he worked for a newspaper. And before you know it, he said, "Hey, I'll help you edit the book." And he was the first one that inspired me. He said, when I was getting depressed and down, and this can't be done, it's too hard. This was a very difficult process. Jay's the one that said, "Henry, this book is a page turner." That's the first time I heard that. Yeah, he's got the book right there. And when I heard that, anyway, I was inspired, and I was determined to get this book out before my mother died. Unfortunately, she didn't see it, but I'd like to feel that she's up there right now listening to us, that she's with us in this room. I'd like to feel that. I hope I answered your question. Hi, Myrna.
You did, and I thought it interesting about what Karen brought up too. I mean, my grandparents are both Holocaust survivors, and they never talked about it, never. Right. And so it's so great to read your story, to give me a little bit of more of an insight into my own family's plight. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Shane. Thank you very much. Hi, Myrna.
Go ahead, Myrna.
Hi, Henry. I've got a couple of questions. Your book starts where your mother's family is, they're celebrating Shabbat, but they're also, it's just right past Kristallnacht. And your grandfather, who obviously you never got to know, is talking about, the Jews should be going to Palestine. Right. And should be going, to their own homeland, because they're now, he's now getting this deep sense of persecution and fear after Kristallnacht. And so my first question to you, and these are two separate questions that are totally related, but why do you think your parents ultimately did not go? I mean, it seemed like a stage might have been set at some point for all of your family who survived, and Luba obviously did end up in Israel, but why do you think your parents chose America over Israel?
That's a very good question. Thank you. Actually, my father was prepared to go to Palestine. He told me the story that he had his bag packed with his tools and all of his stuff, and it was Michalski family Palestine. But he also knew that the Arabs would not allow a Jewish state in their midst. They knew that war was inevitable. He had just fought a war. He had some distant contacts in the United States that he knew he could lean on, and they would sponsor us. And in the last minute, in 1949, the US Congress voted the act that allowed 120,000 refugees into this country. We sat in a displaced persons camp in Deutschland for 2.5 years. No country would take us in. They didn't want Jews. France didn't take us, England wouldn't take us, Australia, Canada. The United States took us in. And I can remember that's how the book ends, of course, where my father comes home from work one day and says, America. And to a 4-year-old boy, America, I'm going to Disneyland. I'm going to someplace really special. Oh, I couldn't wait. Oh, boy, I was excited. And I became an American on that boat My mother drilled this into us, how incredibly proud and fortunate we are to be accepted into this amazing country, and that we're going to be good citizens. We're going to learn the language, we're going to pay taxes, and we're going to contribute to its greatness. We were very fortunate to be taken in by this country. And my parents knew that if they worked hard and played by the rules, they could make it. It's the American dream personified in my family. Thank you. Myrna, go ahead and follow up.
Okay, well, then this is the second question, and it's not, as I say, it's not really related. As a child of Holocaust survivors, you hear about, some of the pain, the sort of pain in the DNA of children of Holocaust survivors. And I'm just curious if you could share with us some of your own experiences as a child of Holocaust survivors, and how it's manifested in your personality or in your psyche. This may be a very complex question, and maybe you haven't thought it all through, but I'm interested in your thoughts on that topic.
Thank you. If you want a detailed answer, you're going to have to wait for the sequel, Lilacs by the Bay, because people are asking, how did you assimilate? And my kids, they're after me. Dad, you got to write these stories. You've got gold, they say, because I tell them these stories. For example, we got off the boat, right? And after Ellis Island, we passed the test. We're in Manhattan now. And me and Jerry are going around like this. We're looking like this. And my mother says, what are you guys doing? What's going on? We're like this. And me and Jerry said, we're looking for gold. Because on the boat, we heard that in America, there's gold on the streets. But we lived sort of a vicarious life. It was very hard. When my friend down the street in San Francisco, Dan Vizard, he would always say, I'm going off to Granny's house. And I always thought, gee, I wonder what that's like, having a grandpa. And he'd always come home with crispy little dollar bills or $5 bills and, special little treats. And I never had that. We were an insular family. There was just the 5 of us. But we kept together. My mom made sure we had clean clothes. We were fed. We were happy. Like I said, my father didn't talk about it, but my mother really wanted this story out. And she told these stories. Ever since I was a child, I heard these stories about her legs, about the dog, all those stories. But I knew we weren't Ozzie and Harriet. We wanted to be the Nelsons, but I understood that we were immigrants. We didn't have any money. Unlike my older brother, I decided I'm not going to badger my parents for stuff because I'm not going to get it anyway. So I didn't badger him. If I wanted something, we got jobs. And I can remember working, even as a 5-year-old, I was already working, sweeping out headquarters for 5 cents, that sort of thing, pulling weeds. Paper routes, whatever. We were always working. If you want something, you went to work. But the survival thing was always there in the back of the mind, that we were a little different. The hard thing for me, Myrna, was at school when kids asked me where I'm from or what's your nationality, because they saw I was a little darker than anybody else and I had an accent, and I ate matzah in April when they ate bread for lunch, that sort of thing. So it was Jerry, especially my older brother, had it very hard. He was 7 years old and they didn't have Yiddish as a second language, you can imagine. So he fought his way through school. I was fortunate. I was 4 or 5 and I went right into kindergarten and words came to me like water. And I think I did a pretty good job of assimilating and learning English and chewing bubble gum and learning baseball and all the rest. But the other foot was in the old world. When I came home and we spoke Yiddish and ate, schmaltz, boiled chicken and all those kind of things. And many books, Myrna, have been written about the first generation of survivors. I'm sure you're aware of that.
Well, thank you for answering my question.
Yeah. There's a lot of psychosis in that first generation.
Glad to be with you, Henry. Good luck on the book.
Thank you.
And Edward, go for it.
Henry, I had a question. When basically my parents had the same story, but we went to Paris and we did the struggle initially and so on. But we lived in a Jewish community. There was a Jewish community of immigrants there that made it. And we really didn't know that I really didn't know as a kid there was anybody else than in this community. Even when I went to high school, we basically had Jewish friends and we would stick together. your parents moved to San Francisco. Did you have a similar experience? A community of friends or Jews that survived the Holocaust?
Right. And they hung around the McAllister Street was the hub of the survivors in the Fillmore district where we ended up on Ellis Street, 1730 Ellis. And on Saturdays, we'd go down to Fillmore Street and then over to McAllister. And that's where all the Jewish delicatessens, and there was a synagogue, and you would meet and talk Yiddish on the street with
Yeah,
the
we used to do it Sunday mornings.
It's called the Green Hayas, all the newcomers.
Yeah, right, exactly. The Hindu. Yeah. Thank
I
you.
remember, I think I told it in the afterwards where they would come to the house to talk to my parents. And I remember one man had some numbers tattooed to his hand, to his arm. And I had these visions, what he must have gone through. And when I heard stories, I think I was much too young to hear these stories about Nazis and all, because I had nightmares. My feet were stuck in concrete and I tried to run and I couldn't, and I was screaming, but nothing came out of my mouth. Nightmares, Nazis chasing, and I know my parents went through a lot. And I tried to be a good boy and make them happy. My mother tells me, I asked her before she died, I said, "Mom, was I a good son?" She says, "You were a good boy."
With similar experience, but as a child, I was surprised that my parents didn't have numbers, because most of the survivors there were from concentration camps. And
Correct.
that was and then I thought they were so fortunate to have been in Russia. The things must have been so much easier for them. So it was interesting. They really were the exception.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you for that.
Henry, there's so many, Susan, I'll let you go next, but just really quickly, what I found, one of the many miracles in the book is they actually found one another. And I mean, people nowadays, if you don't have a GPS or a way of, can't get to the mailbox. So it was just,
That's a
fascinating.
beautiful story, how he's in Siberia on trains. Yeah, he doesn't even know where she is, but he figures she's somewhere in Siberia, I'm going to find her, right? But how he finds her is really amazing. He sees a landsman from his village, and the landsman says, "Get off the train, they're that away." Go down to Kazakhstan. And even in Kazakhstan, he gets to Jambul, the city. Like in the movies, you think he's going to get off the train and she's going to be there waiting for him. No, it took him 2-3 days to find her. Big city full of people. It was wartime. What a story, huh? I'm still amazed what my parents went through and what our people have gone through. And it's not just the Holocaust. This has been going on for thousands of years. This anti-Semitism. This is just the latest chapter. Hopefully we learn from it. That's why this book is so important. We have to learn what happens. I feel like I'm lecturing. Please, any questions?
Susan, go ahead and ask your question. There you go.
Susan.
Let's see. Can you do it? I can find you over here. And
I wanted to ask you, the documentation that you have for your parents' story, was this verbal or was there any documentation, records or whatever?
No records, really. No, it was 90% what my parents told me.
Okay.
And then corroborated. I met, of course, my uncle and Tova in Israel and asked them a lot of questions. Like I said, went to the archives. I went to Poland. I went to Gostynin, to their town, and did a lot of research. I read a lot. I have to share something with you. As a youth, I read hundreds of books on the Holocaust. I'm at a place in my life today, I really can't read books on the Holocaust. I can't see movies on the Holocaust. I find it so dispiriting. It hurts my heart so badly what our people have gone through and are still going through today. It breaks my heart. I can't even, here I wrote a book on the Holocaust. I can't read those books. They're too painful for me.
Did you find that the stories that you heard from different members of your family, did they mesh together?
Yeah.
Did they agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my mother she didn't make up they were ready to amputate her legs. No, these stories, and I went back many times and asked this in different angles and tried to really nail down as much information as I could. Obviously, I had to invent a few characters in the dialogue. I had to invent some of that. to make it more palpable to the reader. But no, the stories are all there. I could not make these up.
I just wanted to make sure that, you know, all of your relatives or all your friends had the same sort of story, you know, that meshed together.
There's no relatives. I have one brother left.
All right, fine.
That's it.
Okay, thank
And
you.
cousins in Israel, and their parents never really talked to them about their lives.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you for the question, Susan. Thank you.
Who else? Anyone have a,
Harvey
Yeah.
and
we have 15 more minutes. It looks like Lily's back. Go ahead.
oh, Leo. Hi, Leo. Unmute. You got to mute yourself.
Okay. All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
It sounds like most of the people here are Jewish that are in the audience, and I'm not Jewish.
Okay.
And I think that this story is bigger than a Holocaust story. This story is unique. And I don't think you should peg it as a Holocaust story. It's got to be broadened. It's so much more than just that. And it affects much more than that. And I just think that, I don't know how you're going to do this, Henry, but
Mhm.
we've got to get you publicity. You got to get on a book tour somewhere, but it's just an outstanding book that outshines every other book.
Thank you so much for saying that. That's. I think Ken Lloyd's probably got some Hollywood connections. We'll have to talk about this, Kenny. Yeah. But thank you for saying that, Leo. That's very sweet. Kenny?
Yeah,
Good.
we go back a long way, Henry. We go back to Alamo
Yep.
and
Third grade.
Presidio and George Washington High School.
Yep.
I think my first thought is to thank you for writing this and sharing this incredible journey that your parents went through. Their remarkable strength of character as well as physical strength and endurance, it is remarkable. And the word that keeps coming out in this discussion is miracles.
Mhm.
And as I read the book, it was one miracle after another. My God, how did they do this? How fortunate were they? What courage and what belief they had. I think the only thing that was tricky for me was this book was keeping me up. I kept reading. I'll just read one more chapter. It is a page turner. It was so hard to put it down, Henry. And I look at it and think, my God, what a story for that age. And as you said it in your introduction, for people to understand now with what's going on in the world, what's going on in America, what's going on in our neighborhoods, to be aware, to look for the signs that threw the world into such a horrible place, and by the grace of God and the strength of your parents, that they endured. And you were able to take the story and do it. So I thank you for sharing it. I think that anyone who reads it is going to come out with greater insights, excuse me, getting a little choked up, and understanding of the world and of life. And you know, if I could help you in any way to do more with this book and getting this story out, I certainly would, you know, but we're old. Hollywood's not looking for us right now. But this is something that the world needs to see and understand. I heard book tours mentioned, and if there's a way to do more in the media with it, Henry, I'm on your side. I'm with you. And again, thank you for sharing this and putting the time and dedication and brilliance and love into telling this amazing and remarkable story that your parents and your family and all of you endured. It's really something.
Kenny, that means a lot to me. I really appreciate it. And I hope you don't mind that I share our phone conversation with this group, because after you read it, you were moved and we talked, and you said something really profound that I'll never forget. Is it okay if I don't know if you remember, but we sat together.
Absolutely, please.
I'm an immigrant boy, and I'm in Alamo School in third grade, and there you are, Ken Lloyd and Bob Zingmark and all the rest of them. And you mentioned to me that while my mother was getting married in Kazakhstan in a burlap sack in a field, your mother was getting married at the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco. And
Absolutely.
how amazing that 5 years later, I'm sitting next to you in a class at Alamo School, and we're just compadres. Isn't that amazing? It's the
That's,
beauty of
again,
America. And
it's just all part of the miracle. You know, when I look at my years, you know, and growing up versus, and my family's versus what your family went through, all Jewish, you know, we all had our Jewish experience, but mine, you know, I was born in San Francisco. My dad was born in San Francisco. My grandmother was born in San Francisco, and my grandmother went to Lowell, which
Wow.
is
Wow.
which is harder thing to
Was her
handle.
name
But
Levi Strauss?
it's so different, and yet, Henry, we share so much in common in terms of beliefs and philosophies, and are tied to Judaism and to just looking at the Holocaust and how it shaped us in so many ways. Again, with such a different set of growing up experiences from you and your family, but nonetheless, that bond is there.
Very well said, Kenny. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
I think,
Henry.
many
Means
of
a
us
lot to
are
me. Thank
feeling
you.
that bond tonight. It says Harvey, but I'm sure you're not Harvey.
You're Barbara. Hi, Barbara.
Go
This is my
ahead.
cousin. This is my cousin, Barbara Slater.
Unmute, please, and say hello.
Left on mute.
Okay.
There you go.
Harry?
So Henry and I are cousins, and I go back and remember how my grandmother on Friday night would have family gatherings at her place every Friday night. And I knew his mom, his father, and all our celebrations were together, bar mitzvahs, weddings, whatever they were. Never did the subject come up of history, of the Holocaust, of what they went through. Henry, you've done such a wonderful job sharing this experience that I would never know. And we're family, but I would never know it. So thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. And dear Harvey, thank you so much. We'll get together soon.
I think that is the biggest takeaway from tonight is that this story hasn't been told. If you've watched my eyes go up, I'm trying to remember like a book or a Hollywood story that had told the exodus from Poland that ended in Siberia. I've just only heard of people rounded up and put in concentration camps. So having this alternative narrative is so important. So everyone who thinks it needs to be a Hollywood movie, I agree for that reason. But more importantly, your mother, the character of Fela, is somebody's going to want to chew the scenery with that. You need to start thinking, who can I approach that sees this character and realizes that she's a dynamo and really propels the story. I don't imagine that they would have found one another if she hadn't had the will to leave her village and go on that journey to find your father. And it's just.
Right. Thank you so much. I'm going to make it my life's work to check the beaches of Tel Aviv, looking for the right person to play my mother as the young, beautiful fella. That should be a nice trip.
We only have a few more minutes together, but I'm wondering if you could tell us more how that spirit lived when she came to America. Did she still have that?
Oh, right to her dying day. Right.
Tell us about that.
Then. She did not. You couldn't get away with anything. She had eyes behind her back. She knew everything. She knew when the phone rang. She had that sixth sense. She was pretty hardcore. She selected my friends for me and totally, she really ran the ship pretty much and didn't take any prisoners along the way. She was pretty hardcore right to the end. Strong. I never met a stronger woman in my life, ever.
Well, it comes across in the book that
Yeah.
Here we go.
Took advantage of her.
Oops.
She tells some stories. David?
I just want to tell you, I had an argument with your mother when we were on our trip. We did Hanukkah in Hawaii. Do you remember it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, my mother, my daughter, and my son.
Your son went together to Hawaii, and we just had a bit of an argument, and I just thought she was pretty feisty. I think I won the argument. No, she won
You
the
can't
argument.
win. You're not going to win. Feisty is a very good word to describe her.
Feisty. Henry, I also want to tell you that if you do, when you do your book tour, and you're on the radio and you talk about the next chapter that you begin to talk about looking for gold.
Yeah.
Harry Golden. Does the name Harry Golden mean anything to you? He was a writer and he wrote something called the Carolina Israelite. It was a newspaper. And he tells the story, and I think you can use it. So I'm going to tell it real quickly. He says, when the first Jewish immigrants came to America, they were told that the streets were paved with gold. When they got here, they found that the streets were not even paved. And then they found out that they were the ones who were expected to do the paving.
Right.
Have you heard that one?
Yeah, no, but it makes sense.
It's a pretty good one, I think.
I can remember bringing the Chabad rabbi from Napa to my mother's house in San Francisco. And of course, he wouldn't shake her hand. And my mother says to him, listen, don't be so religious. Come on, shake my hand. Let's have a hug. She's like that. Get over it. She had no filter. Whatever came to her mind would come right out. And young people especially loved her because she would say, you got to lose weight. You should take up running. You should do this. She would tell people how to live their life, and she didn't care what they thought. She just said what she felt. Very strong woman, feisty. That's a good one. And like I said, no one ever took advantage of her. No one. And she was just very careful. She had life experiences that taught her you have to be careful who you deal with. Rabbi, thank you for that. Where are you? There you are. We have about 5 minutes.
Yes, am I missing anyone who would?
Just one more. I know I've spoken a lot. Henry, I appreciated the short chapters. Short chapters are great. If you want to finish a book, because I would wake up in the middle of the night, I could read 1 or 2 chapters and go back to sleep. So keep them short if you're going to have another edition, or I'm glad that you are short. And I forgot what the other thing was because I'm old now. Oh, trust. Trust. She somehow knew whom she could trust more or less. And I thought that was a great kind of fifth perception of hers. She really understood people.
You remember that scene? It was called Dory was the chapter. Doroshenko, the Ukrainian farmer, who picks him up in a wagon, and he's being so nice. And she says to Kuba, why is he being so nice? And Kuba says, are you going to hate everybody that's not Jew? Is everybody out to kill us? There's got to be a nice person in the world somewhere. But she already has her suspicions. He's too nice, is what she says. She's on guard.
Sixth sense is what I meant. Yeah, thanks.
I made short chapters for you, David. I knew you were going to read the book.
Jay, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you want to weigh in? It sounds like you were pretty instrumental in making this book happen.
Yeah, Jay Getting right there.
Yeah, let's hear from you. I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, you are. Well, first of all, I would say what a pleasure it was to work with Henry. We got together, as he mentioned early on, that we decided to collaborate and come up with this product that he'd been working on for years. And I said, hey, if I could help put this out in front of the people, let's do it. And we started to work on it, and we did it. And I'm just proud to be a part of it. And I'm so happy to hear all the positive comments. What else can I say? I had no part in the creation part. I refined it. Okay.
But Jay, you were a great inspiration for me in writing. I would never give up, but I was getting despondent and can we really pull this off? And you're the one that kept me going. You would call me sometimes and say, Henry, we got to get to work. We got to put this book out.
Well, yeah, you needed a little kick in the behind from time to time.
Yeah.
But we managed through. We worked, geez, 2 or 3 years, I guess, before we finally came up with the final product.
I came down there 3 times. You came up to San Francisco. Yeah, but we got it done.
Yeah, we did, and I'm proud of it, and I know you are, and I know people are appreciating it. So that's very important.
Right. Thank you again, Jay. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So Henry, I think we have a time for some final thoughts, something that you'd like us to take away from tonight.
I've said what I can say. I'm just thrilled that this book is finally out there, that the suffering that they endured, it's just horrible. At least the world is now recognizing what they went through. Hopefully they will learn from it. History does repeat, but hopefully when we see evil in this world, we'll do something because evil flourishes when good people do nothing and just sit back and say, well, it doesn't affect me. I'm not Jewish, or I'm not this, or I'm not. We have to be involved and care for each other. And just be nice, trust, love.
Nice.
We're all human beings. We're all part of this. We're all part of this experience. And I hope my book can make a little difference. I'm thrilled that it's at the university level now as required reading, and I hope it gets on the screen where multitudes can see it. It's never been about the money. That was never a motivating. I never thought about that. I just wanted the book out, but hopefully a lot of people can see this and learn from it and decide that this should never happen again to anyone. Because let's face it, anti-Semitism, that was one of the motivators for me, is that the recurrence of anti-Semitism, the resurgence of it, and the denial of it, and the perpetuation of it throughout the world right now. I can cite 20 incidences just in the last week. So it's an important book for my people, for all people.
It's a great Hanukkah gift.
And I especially adore this group that have read it, that have made the time to focus in and listen and participate. You're all very dear to me, every one of you. And I really appreciate your presence here tonight, and especially Bookmine for giving me this opportunity. It means a lot. And I want to say thank you to Myrna and to Joel and to Leo and to Kenny and to the Barishes and my cousin and to Howard Eisenstadt, to Jan, to Jay, to Rabbi Kopstein, to Shane, my new best friend, and Karen, all of you. Thank you so much. And to Hal Ottaway, all the way from Iowa, I think. It's really great to see all of you and have you here. It means a lot to me. Thank you.
And I would like to thank all of you as well. We appreciate you being here. Go to our events page on our website and look for other authors that you might enjoy in the next few months. And you'll get an email soon with a link to this as a YouTube video if you want to watch it or show it to your friends. Thank you. It was a pleasure being with all of you tonight. Take care.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right.
Great. That was great, man.
Was it good?
Yeah. 2 comments.
Okay. Yeah, at first it was great.
No, it was